move my
That's
things.
a lot of people want to talk to you, so I'm like the last one.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's so good. Okay, so you basically go around and study, what do you call them? Traditional?
Yeah, traditional cultures, the indigenous cultures. In America, we would use the word tribe, but that's not really used overseas.
Okay.
It's more community.
And why did you get into that?
I became really interested. I grew up reading a lot of National Geographic, and then when I was bedbound for many years, I went back to my old readings of anthropological novels and books and accounts, and and stumbled upon Weston A. Price. And when I surprisingly went into remission and was able to travel again,
What was wrong with you again?
I had an infection that went into my brain, and the fever from that damaged the hypothalamus and then later all my other organs. So I had stage 4 kidney disease, I was on a breathing machine, and I was in bed for years with neuropathy and other things. So I wasn't supposed to heal. It was a condition called dysautonomia underneath it all. But when I did, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if any of these places still exist? And I wonder if they do. So really not expecting anyone to not be modernized, I went out and started exploring, and then I got a bit addicted. Really. Yeah.
One of the things, I came in late, but one of the things I was hearing people ask about was using that work of not just trying to understand, say for instance, the diets of traditional cultures, but to warn them. Is that, am I picking up on that like you're telling them, hey, you know, this stuff is coming from the outside, beware of it? Or did that just come up as an indirect?
That was an indirect question. I try not to tell them too much because that's been a large part of the problem, is people coming in and telling them things. But we are in a bit of a crisis right now. The modernization I've seen in the last 3 years has been far more rapid than what I was seeing before that. And so the cultures are modernizing very quickly and starting to have very serious health issues from that, whereas they didn't have them before. And they're often in isolated places. So they're getting our health conditions without our medicine. And also, they're still getting the dietary and lifestyle dogma that we all received when we were children. So it's a bad combination. So I started a project called Cows for Kids back in the day that would hopefully re-educate some of the sources. So primary sources were the churches coming in, the schools that were government mandated and new, and then the nonprofits coming in and making donations for clothing and shoes and food. And so where I would go and see these cultures that were in perfect health, everyone ate their traditional diet except when they went to school. And so I organized a project that would fund the traditional diet in the school, and then the community would keep alive. So I've done it that way through like education, but only after I get to know them very well, because it would be like me walking into your house and telling you that you're wrong. And so I have to get to know them very deeply before anything like that can happen.
I'm gonna switch this way, that way Sally doesn't have, she can have her space there.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you were talking about, it seemed like when you're talking about these cultures that they're kind of almost, it comes across like they're living within their own little bubble.
Yes.
So what's government look like? Because I think my viewers have a lot of questions about our relationship with our government now and how it affects the things that you've talked about, relationships with our family, diet, all kinds of things.
Yes.
So what does that look like, and what lessons can we learn about relationship, I guess, with, I don't know if maybe the relationship's the right word, but with the way that we do government from them, so that you preserve a sense of, I guess, independence from that.
Yes.
You know, if you have to have some kind of governance.
Mm-hmm. They really don't need the governance, but there are countries now and they live within the country. So the one mandate that I see is really the education. And they have to be educated, and the families have to come up with the money for the outfits, the uniforms for the children, which is a hurdle because money isn't used. And so they have to figure out how to make money and all of these things. But otherwise, aside from that, the only time I see the government really come in is in making laws in which to modernize them faster. So for instance, in many countries, it's illegal to wear traditional clothing in the towns and in the cities. So if someone leaves the village, they have to have t-shirts or something modern to wear, and they're not allowed to, if they're female, to expose their breasts. Even in the last 3 years, the Embera tribe which is from Colombia to Panama. And there's different, each community is different within the Imbera, but the women always had their breasts out. It wasn't sexual. And now the government has made that illegal. And if someone goes with YouTube, the women have to put on tops, these kind of things.
Curious, how does that affect then the sexualization of a female's anatomy? The rules themselves.
Yes. It doesn't happen within the group, but it does outside. And so people will come to kind of goggle and be inappropriate. It hasn't affected the way that they view it, though, that I've seen.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, so if it comes to, like, you'd say, looking at Americans who are, obviously very different, and we're trying to take something, what would you say, like, you had one piece of advice, and maybe not specific to government, but just, I don't know, reclaiming a sense of, what do you call it, regality? Character? I don't know if it's individualism, really, because a lot of this is communal that you're talking about. What's your advice?
The hard thing is that I would say there's 100 things instead of one. Yeah. And I've always been like that.
Where do you start, though? Self-awareness? Maybe that's the better way to ask it. Like, what's the attitude shift for an American? Well, maybe not just an American, but maybe, I think a lot of my viewers are probably Western, with a Western mindset. What's an attitude shift? I liked a lot of the stuff you were talking about was very present. Didn't you talk about kind of like a constant meditative state, like just a very deep presentness in the moment? Yes. So if thinking about, like, it from that perspective, what would be the one shift in attitude, or I guess just direction of your soul or your being that you would change to then go down the path of nutrition or whatever else?
Well, to be honest, I think I would start with nutrition and at least a morning routine with daylight, because unless you get your villi and your bacteria in a good state, it's very difficult to make all your feel-good chemicals. And if you have your feel-good chemicals going, then it's very easy to be present. I see a lot of people really struggling with presence, struggling to not think, struggling to just be here now. And it's much easier when you have the proper nutrition and you're getting daylight in your eyes and on your skin. So I would probably start with that. But in terms of then what to eat, that's always the next question, right? And it would be eat from wherever you are in like a 1 mile radius to 30 and only foods that were there 500 years ago. So pre-colonialism.
That's very almost impossible to do in some places in the United, or a lot of places in the United.
Yeah, unless you know how to process the food. So unless you've read Dr. Bill's book or like the Weston A. Price books, and you've learned how to process the foods properly. Yeah. Because a lot of foods, it's not that they're bad for us, traditional foods. It's that people struggle to eat them now because they don't know how to process them now. And they've lost that. But not everyone has. So as long as you're willing to spend time in the kitchen or pay someone who does, then I would start with that.
Okay. Okay, one last question. Yeah. I, as a parent, was really interested in what you were talking about with the way that kids and adults and just the community reacts with each other. Like, it made me think of my daughter, all these, she's 3, and like a lot of behaviors we look at and we're like, this is like wild behavior, actually seems to be like very normal when I'm hearing but there's got to be a sense of discipline, I'm guessing. Like you have order and structure of some kind. So what does that look like? How do you, like, one of the things you said was, kids will just come right up to you and just jump in your lap. Like my daughter does that all the time. And we kind of are like, is that okay? Because we don't know everybody here. And what if they're, what if they're this kind of guy or that kind of, you get kind of, as a parent in today's world. On the other hand, you want to encourage like what would be a naturally trusting posture towards the world. So I'm just curious, like, how do they balance, maybe they don't have to, but what does discipline and structure look like? And, how can we regain some of that wildness among our children in a society that, does have issues that they might not be dealing with?
Yeah, I haven't honestly thought about it in a modern context in terms of connection, because I see so many kids who aren't able to connect, who don't make eye contact, who don't like hugs or touch. It's a huge problem. It's wonderful that your children do. That's so great. I think then you just keep them around people that they know, and if it's strangers, then no. But in these cultures, you don't have those issues. You don't have the issues of child molestation and these kind of things. So, and I'm talking about the real traditional ones that are healthy. As soon as you modernize, you're going to have more of that. So, I don't mean to say it doesn't exist in some of these lands, but not in the very traditional places.
What does the discipline of a child look like?
So the discipline is It's a bit more like how it used to be. So I grew up with a lot of kids in the family, and when you have a lot of kids in the family, there's just rules that everyone knows to do because you see everyone else doing it. And that's kind of what it is. So the children will be, say, 3 and peeling something with a big knife by a fire and by a cliff, and no one has to tell them, like, don't burn yourself, put the knife down, and don't fall off the cliff, because they know. And so it's part of the environment, and there's a great deal of trust, and the kids aren't as sporadic or hectic. And so they're not like flailing their bodies all around. They're much more controlled and calm, and they're kind of let to do their thing. They're given a lot of trust and autonomy, and that is kind of rewarded back to the parents. But I think you have to be very healthy for that and be in a communal situation for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else that you just off the top of your head never get asked or you think is interesting to share?
Ooh, I think the fertility stuff is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something we didn't talk about. But in the truly traditional places, they don't have fertility issues at all. No issue in childbirth, no issue having children. Some of the groups have children far into their 50s. Regular cycles, no period cramps. Yeah, the fertility stuff is fascinating.
And what's the root of that?
That's just how we're supposed to be. Honest.
It's the food. It's just
food and lifestyle. I mean, hormones are the communication system of the body. They're different than all other organs. So the way you and I are talking is going to affect my hormones. If someone carries my books out of class, that's going to balance my estrogen, right? So different actions affect our hormones, not just our diet, and so does sunlight.
Okay, I did think of one last thing.
Yeah.
Stress. What does stress look like for them?
It's non-existent.
Doesn't exist.
No, non-existent.
Okay, so what is stress then? Is it expectation? Is it our expectations that drive it? And because these cultures you're working with are living so much in the moment, they don't have expectations that are derailed. It's just, I'm gonna go with whatever's happening right now. Like, what do you think is part of our lifestyle that causes stress if you're not seeing it in a traditional culture?
I think it comes from confusion. I think we've really lost our roles in society, so we're confused as to what role we should play and what we should do, and we're deciding the rules as we go. Whereas in these communities, they have set places for everyone. No one is confused. They also get perfect sleep. They go to sleep with the sun and wake up with the sun. Who here gets good sleep? It's very rare. So it's seen as a privilege to get rest and sleep. In most of these cultures, they get a lot of rest. Like when I was with the Toltecs in Mexico, and the shamans take 6 months of the year to go be in the forest and gain energy so that then they can go and help people. Our physicians don't do anything like that. They don't take breaks. So we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves.
Okay.
And too many rules.
All right. Mary, thank you.
Thank you.
Where should people go to follow you?
On Instagram, I'm Mary Ruddick. I'll post whenever I'm in Wi-Fi zones, so bear with me. And I have a few videos on YouTube. I will edit more and get them up as I have Wi-Fi. And my website is enableyourhealing.com.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
get out of your
Didn't realize how close we were to the start of your talk.
Yeah, well, she got.
There was like, a whole line. Good luck. And I think this is like my final big takeaway from this, even though there's a lot in what she discussed, is she says illness is not normal, being sick is not normal, and that when it comes to stress and stress, the effect of stress on our body, our immune system, and being sick, my takeaway from her talk was she described a state of living which almost has no expectation about much farther from right now. And it made me realize that my experiences of stress almost always come from having an expectation of how things should be compared to reality. Instead of living the reality, I live in my mind the frustration, and that creates anger or fear. And if I lived what's in front of me, if I just stayed in the moment, I didn't get so far ahead of myself. I mean, practically we have to maybe plan for, like, I'm gonna go to the grocery store tomorrow because I have this window of free time. But, like, for instance, I was really stressed about this conference at one point because I was like, well, what if this doesn't work out or that doesn't work out? And that's, I mean, there's no way for me to even there's no way for me to even fix that because it hasn't happened yet. You know, there's certain things I can plan for pragmatically, but it's like my expectation versus reality. And if you have no expectation, if you just live extremely present, then there's no stress. I mean, that's kind of what I got from her. And she called it a near constant state of meditation. This has been a theme for me over the last at least 6 months, if not for a year, because I realize I'm terrible at it. I always am like 10 steps ahead, trying to prevent whatever disaster could be coming down the pipeline that I frankly create in my own head. And this made me very effective as a journalist in television news because there were always disasters that I was either covering or were going to happen during my day as a reporter that I had to get ready for. The camera not working, I'm live and the prompter goes out, or my notepad is missing, or I can't hear the producers, or I hear myself talking, or whatever. I can't get my interview. My boss tells me don't come back to the station without an interview. My interview drops. I gotta talk to people about these terrible things. I mean, I was very effective at my job because of my ability to overanalyze and overthink disaster. But I was never in the moment. And I think the job was cyclical in that I was good at it and that it afforded me the ability to stay in that state that I was very good at, which actually was not a healthy state. And it is very difficult to be present. It is very, very difficult to be present in today's world. And yet there's so much peace in that. Because if you really look at just right now, like what I'm doing, I'm holding a camera, talking to my cell phone with people probably who think I'm crazy. No, I'm just, I just make that up. I think I'm crazy here. And there's like nothing else that I need to be thinking about right now. I just need to do this. And I've been doing yoga for 10 years and have started that practice. But even in yoga, you know, my brain goes everywhere. The thing I liked about yoga is that it's a moving meditation. It's very hard to do the movements if you don't pay attention to what you're doing. But then I get good at the practice, and so I can tune out because I know the next pose. So then that becomes the next thing. Anyway, I just thought it was really interesting that when you visit the people that she has talked about, who, like I said, have sort of modernized, but not really. Like they may wear a t-shirt, she said, or they have cell phones, but they're not connected to the internet. And they're still hunter-gatherers and practice a lot of like ancient traditions, that she hasn't noticed much stress or trauma. That she basically said that like trauma is not the result of having bad things necessarily happen, like things that are challenging. That doesn't lead to trauma. That they have their basic needs met, they have a healthy microbiome, and they have relationship, and they live in the present, and so you just get over the bad thing and then you move on. You don't have bad thoughts about it. You know, it's not like it doesn't become your identity. And I think we tend to, like, at least in my culture, tend to identify with the bad stuff. It becomes a part of us. And then that's what I guess we would call trauma. So it was just very interesting, but I think my big takeaway from Mary Ruddick is just that extreme presentness, that may be a very ancient and very real part of what it means to actually be a human being, to live fully. That is something that is tradition, and that all the other stuff, like eating healthy foods and getting enough sunlight and doing your daily supplements or whatever, that it only takes you so far if you are not present with your experience. You're living elsewhere and you're stressing yourself out, because your mind can completely destroy everything that you're trying to do physically. You can make yourself very sick. And I know that because I have. And so anyway, I really enjoyed that part of her talk, that when you get to these places where life is very simple or simpler than we have made our lives in the modern world, that it has a direct effect on stress and a direct effect on one's ability to just live in the moment. So what do you think? Let me know.